morning right here on News and Views to be joined by independent researcher on Middle East and Africa, Mariam Jooma. And when one looks at the events of the last 2 weeks, the attack by Israel on Iran and the Iranian response, the United States of America, looking at the greater Middle Eastern region. And one can actually take just so much from there. And at the same time, taking a look at other players like Turkey, for instance, as well. And, much as we sometimes see many of these countries, in particular Turkey and Iran, we may be seeing them as rivals, where the one is Persian, the other is Turkic, one is Shia led, the other Sunni led as well. But the question is, what has this experience actually meant for the greater region, the Middle Eastern region? How differently is Iran actually being looked at by the Muslim world, the greater Muslim world, the Middle East in particular, considering the fact that Iran has been one of the few countries, or the only country at this point in time, that has taken on Israel, and we know the damage that has actually been done, the reputational damage, and also the damage from a military perspective as well. We know what has happened in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, all the cities, the destruction that has taken place as well. So, trying to just unpack and understand the Turkey position. And we know that under Erdogan, Turkey has developed a non-aligned posture and never ever has openly allied with Iran, but it has shielded Iran to a certain extent. Mariam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Uncle Inay, thank you so much for having me again.
Yes, Mariam, there are just so many interesting dynamics that have been playing out. And I think a lot that we can actually take from what has been taking place in the last 2 weeks since the attack by Israel on Iran and the response of the world in general, whether we're talking about the United States of America, we're looking at Western Europe, you're looking at the Middle East, and also Turkey. And this is the subject that we want to a subject that we want to actually talk about this morning, is to look at Turkey's position as far as Iran is concerned. Now, I painted a brief picture in terms of the rivalry, in terms of the ideological differences between the two. But just looking at Turkey and your observations in the last 2 weeks, the response from Turkey, and also looking at Erdogan in terms of where he stands as far as Iran is concerned.
Uncle Inayat, Iran and Turkey go way back. So, as you mentioned, there's almost the ancient rivalries between the two, stemming from the Ottoman and then the Persian Safavid Empire. Actually, I don't think many people know this, but the Safavid Empire, actually one of the reasons for taking on Shiism as a form of Islam was to distinguish themselves from the Ottomans. So, these historical nuances somehow find themselves playing out in our modern day politics. But I think what's important is that we look at not just the long history of competition, but look at the modern context in the fact that they haven't actually fought a war between the two of them in modern times. So while they've used, proxy forces in the region, and they often find themselves on opposite ends of or opposite sides of the conflicts in Syria, in Iraq, in Azerbaijan, but they haven't gone directly to war, the two of them. And I think my personal understanding is that these two countries have learned to coexist and manage their tensions, and we could say even, occasionally cooperate closely when it suits their national interest. And it comes down to the fact that in politics, there are no ideologies, there are only interests. And so you wouldn't call them best friends, but you could say they kind of seasoned rivals, who figured out how to go about the business of business without attacking the other one. And then importantly, the issue of energy, Uncle Inayat, is very crucial to the region, energy and trade. And we have to understand how Turkey has played, together with Qatar, quite a vital role to keeping the Iranian regime alive through, providing a space for bypassing the sanctions. So, for example, in 2012, Turkey actually used the gold payments that it used gold to pay for Iranian oil because it is quite dependent on Iranian oil. But by using their Halk Bank, which is a national bank, and they used that to bypass the U.S. banking restrictions. So, where people would argue that Turkey is facilitating the genocide because they allow for Azeri oil to flow through to Israel, we have to look at the dynamic in context as a whole and look at how Turkey has actually allowed the Iranian economy to access its own funds through banking systems in Turkey and in Qatar. So the trade between the two countries, it's an unbelievable amount. If you look at it, before 2023, it was around $10 billion. For the sanctions. And so they're trying to slowly get it back to this figure again. You could say that when Tehran gets squeezed, it turns to Ankara and to Doha, and it's not because of the affection or the idea that they have some common ideology, but it's simply because both Qatar and Turkey help them to keep the economic oxygen flowing. And by basically expanding on this leverage, both Turkey and Qatar have actually found themselves in the position of quite crucial regional powers.
Yes, but also, Mariam, I think what is important to understand is looking at Turkey and the policy of non-alignment. Now, this is featured not only in its relationship with Iran. We know with regards to China, with regard to Russia as well. And just to understand this strategic non alignment policy as far as Turkey is concerned. And I mentioned earlier on, despite what has happened in Syria, and you spoke about their proxies as well, but Turkey has shielded Iran from Western pressure, NATO, the United Nations as well. And again, is this, has this largely got to do with the economic interdependence between these two countries, or do you see a bigger picture emerging?
Look, it's very important for us to anchor everything in the historical trajectory. So Turkey today is not the Turkey of 1957 when it became a NATO member. At that time, it was very much secular, very much under the Ataturk, CHP realm, where the desire to be Western was, at the forefront of its foreign policy, was to be accepted as a Western country. And the same could be said for Iran at the time. It was at the time of the Shah. So both countries have got a long history of secularism that came to decimate the Islamic character before. And in turn, both have had revivals. And so where Turkey still is a NATO member, I think we should not use that as a line of criticism, but actually to look at it as a strategic strength for the region, and particularly for Muslim countries. So it means that Turkey sits at the same table, basically, as the US and the UK and France. And those are the countries that shape global security policy. So Turkey doesn't always the NATO line. This is important. And as you've highlighted, it has actually helped to shield Iran from being voted against, it voted against UN sanctions on Iran of its nuclear program in 2010. It also hosted indirect US-Iran talks in Istanbul in 2011 and 2012. And now most recently in the Israel-Iran crisis, Turkey as well as Qatar were acting as back channels, so relaying the concerns to NATO, but also privately having developed trust between Tehran and Ankara. So Iran actually, in my understanding, views Turkey as a bridge. It's not fully Western, it's not fully Eastern, and that's where its value lies. So when Iran wants to send a message to NATO, it will, ring up Ankara, and this allows for the diplomatic cover, diplomatic shield for Iran. And Qatar provides an economic lifeline. So I think where, the analysis of the region has often been about polarization and for the actors being completely on opposite ideological positions, we forget that economics is really at the heart of politics. And it's where the money and the facilitation of the flow of money comes from. That is actually where you're going to see the real politics happening.
Yes, but also, Mariam, in terms of Turkey finding a balancing act, because this is important to understand, and in a looking at it in a broader global political scenario, where we know even in the last 2 weeks, when the entire world, except for countries like Russia, China, North Korea, that actually went against what America and Western Europe was trying to achieve as far as Iran is concerned. And we know that Iran has got these strategic partnerships with both the likes of Russia and China as well. And also looking at Turkey and Erdogan and his relationship with these countries. But at the same time as well, there are leanings towards the West as well. How does Turkey actually balance this act, particularly when one looks at what is playing out globally, the United States of America versus the rest of the world, versus Russia versus China, and also drawing in the likes of Western Europe and NATO?
Uncle Inayat, I think there's a lot that we can be depressed about or look at negatively when it comes to global politics. But if we are able to zoom out a little bit, I think we might be able to find that there's an increasing emergence of a multipolar world where the weaponization of the U.S. through its economic tools has become, it's widely undermined. So where you've got now the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, and BRICS having potential for convergence, there's an powerful axis that's not just economic, but also geopolitical that's forming. And that can be the foundation of new resistance. So with Turkey, I think it's a matter of using their outward secular character in the sense of it being a republic and having a secular constitution and so on. But that it's essentially the heart of it is, with the Ummah. And by having both kind of head and heart working on sides, so with the external character being able to engage the West, whereas its Muslim identity is also providing trust that it builds with other Muslim countries. And remember, Turkey is not just simply it's not simply just political. It has significant military weight. And that was shown very powerfully in the most recent India-Pakistan conflict, where Turkey provided a lot of the military hardware and the drones and training for the Pakistani military. So if one puts all of this together, we realize that if the Muslim region, or at least if the Middle East region is able to leverage each country's strategic power, it can actually provide a very really a counter resistance to the Western and Israeli and Zionist influence. And I think BRICS provides the political architecture, whereas the GCC gives the currency and the financial system. So we're going to see, in my opinion, a move away from the SWIFT and the dollar system, and we're going to actually find that the cross-border digital currency infrastructure will actually become more important. And I think just finally, Uncle Inait, the thing is, Trump, put himself out as being the mediator of this 12-day war between Israel and Iran. But if we look at it from a different perspective, I would argue we could say that it was actually a global South mediated ceasefire. So we had Qatar actively involved in the background, Turkey and China. So, whereas the US wants to take the credit, to be honest, it was the powers of leverage came from the three global South countries.
Mariam, how do you see the role of Turkey as a mediator? Because the reason why I'm asking this question is here, as you mentioned and you correctly pointed out, the role of Qatar and also some of the other countries in the background in terms of mediating this war between Israel and Iran. And we knew this would have had global consequences. Economically and in more ways than one. And as you pointed out correctly, in terms of the global south as well. As far as leverage is concerned, what sort of leverage would Turkey have on an issue like Gaza? Because I think what many are disappointed about is the opportunity when the ceasefire between Iran and Israel was announced, there was absolutely no mention of Gaza, and many felt that Iran should have taken advantage of its position at this point in time to, at the very least, make mention of Gaza as well, and also taking a look at a country like Turkey in terms of any leverage it would have to actually stop this genocide in Palestine and in Gaza.
Absolutely. I think it's important to recognize that the regional countries all focused on Iran and Israel as just two independent entities that were in conflict without anchoring it in the actual cause, which is the genocide in Gaza, absolutely. But Erdogan was actually very clear about that. And he said that this is a distraction from Gaza and we should not allow it to take away from what's happening there. And even when it came to the ceasefire, Turkey actually re-emphasized or highlighted again that it should work towards bringing calm to Gaza as well. So, on the one hand, we could say that Turkey is not doing enough. But if we look at the diplomatic statements, it's almost as though each player within the Middle East has been assigned a role. So Turkey has the role of political cover, Qatar has the role of economic lifeline, and you have the smaller GCC countries then applying pressure through their foreign direct investments in the West. And it might sound a bit unrealistic or perhaps rose-tinted to look at it that way. But I do think that the alliance of Iran, Qatar, and Turkey can really influence the Palestinian issue from within. And because they actually have a lot of leverage with Hamas. Iran arms and funds Hamas, Qatar houses its political leadership, and then Turkey gives both in addition to international cover. So I think, there's a way in which each player within this current context can bring the best of what it has to offer for the benefit of the Palestinians. The question is, how do they disengage from their Western alliances? And I think for us as an ummah, it's been too slow. We, absolutely fed up with having to have U.S. bases in the Middle East and so on. But if we look at it from a historical timeline perspective, I actually would argue that we're at the precipice of some really significant positive change in the Middle East, where we can actually find there's more to cooperate on rather than find difference in, and that includes the Shia-Sunni issue.
Well, Mariam, let's see what develops, but always very, very interesting in engaging with you as well, and canvassing your views as well. And we're all always, appreciative of the fact that you take time out with us right here on Assalam Media. So we wish you all the best. Have a great Jummah as well. And hope to talk
Jazakallah.
soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam. Jazakallah.
I mean, Mariam Juma Çarikçi was us this morning, independent research on Middle East and Africa. And yes, very, very interesting dynamics that have actually been playing out. And I think this is just a lot that one can actually take away from these events and these experiences that we see unfolding in front of our very own eyes. But once again, we need to re-emphasize, and we need to emphasize it over and over again. Uh, the the question of Palestine, the genocide in Gaza, and the sooner we see that behind us, I think the more easier it will actually make it for many of these countries who have come under the radar, under the spotlight as well, and have come under a lot of criticism, and a fair amount of criticism is actually justified, and particularly looking at the impotent the impotent attitude and the inability of many of these countries to do something concrete as far as Gaza is concerned. And that also includes the likes of many of the Arab countries, the Gulf countries, criticisms leveled against Saudi Arabia, the UAE, very, very heavily invested in this genocidal Zionist regime in more ways than one. We saw what had taken place in Egypt at the height of the Iran-Israeli war that was taking place, turning away thousands of protesters who had converged in Cairo as well. So all of these issues actually playing out, and I think this is where the impatience on many a humanitarian, many an activist, many a member of the Muslim Ummah is actually growing, and also at the same time wanting to see an end to this genocide, because it's getting brutal by the day. People queuing for food, and each day 20, 30, 40 people killed, many are injured as well, and this cannot continue. This cannot last forever. We're going to go for a quick break. We come back, we'll be having Juman Nasiha with Mufti Hussein Hatiani, the Imam of Masjid al Ansar in Lakefield, Benoni.